things like family or significant others. It could be places like Belize or Bemidji. It could be a thing like a cabin or a home or a boat. It could be a concept like justice or freedom. One thing that you value or that is important to you in each one of those circles. All right? I'll give you just a couple of seconds to do that. All right, stop right where you are. What I like to do is play a game, and the game is very simple. What I want you to do is to find two people for each one of the things that you wrote down. Once you have found people who either agree with what you have or think that what you have is really cool, I want them to put their signature next to the things that they agree with or have similar, that they think are really cool or that they have similar to you. So 2 signatures for each. You have 5 circles, which means you'll have a total of how many signatures as a minimum? 10. 10 signatures as a minimum. You have 90 seconds to do that, starting now. Game over. Get over here. Mortal Kombat fans? Any Mortal Kombat fans? So one might ask, how does this particular activity lead us to this conversation about a case for diversity? And so there are a couple of premises that I operate from, and hopefully those will become clear, that I also hope that you take with you as practices. So one of the things that I learned as a high school teacher, and more so as a middle school teacher, so after surviving middle school, anything, they say, well, how do you do these presentations in front of hundreds of people or thousands of people? And I say, after you survive middle school, you can do anything, right? But one of the things that I learned was, in middle school, I had rules in my classroom. And interestingly enough, my students spent more time trying to find the loopholes in my rules than they did actually following the rules in my classroom. So I stopped having rules. I stopped having rules. And it's also, yeah, I stopped having rules. I'll tell this other story as well. So I stopped having rules, and I had principles. I had principles in my room. And so when people would break the principle, then we could actually have a conversation, because in some ways, when they saw rules, they were weighing what the consequences were and said, you know what, I can pay that consequence, so I'll do this thing. But when we had the principles, they had to come up or find ways to fix the relationships that were damaged, right? So I'm not going to give you rules about diversity, rules about how to think about things, but I do want to give you principles so that you can apply them in your life. When my wife and I were in marriage, premarital counseling stuff, our pastor brought us together and had these conversations with other couples and stuff, and he said, I want you to think about, why do you like your spouse? Like, why do you like your spouse? Why do you love them? And so people started raising their hands, and they had all sorts of reasons. And my pastor just kind of laughed at us all and said, if you have reasons, your relationship is doomed. Because those reasons can run out. Those reasons can change. He said, you're doomed. And so what I don't want to give you is I don't want to give you rules about diversity and inclusion and equity, because things can change, but I want to give you principles to operate by as you do your work. All right? So there's that. So as you were going around the room, were there things you saw in other people's papers and you were like, wow, why didn't I think of that? I should have wrote that down. What were some things you saw that you thought you should have wrote down? What was that? Integrity. Two more. Religion. One more. Yes. Health, right? So those are things that you saw in other people's papers and said, I know I only have 5, but I should have thought about those things, or I could have thought about those things. Were there also things that that were more difficult to find people to sign on, or are actually still blank? Does anybody? Yes.
Good fun.
Good fun.
Good.
Oh, food. Good food. Please raise your hand if you value good food, even if it wasn't written on your paper. All right, cool. 2 more.
Feeding the world.
Feeding the world, if that is a value, making sure that people have ample food to survive is important to you. Raise your hand if that's a value. All right, cool. 1 more. Co-workers. If your co-workers are important to getting your work done, and or you have relationships with them that are positive, please raise your hand if that's of value to you. Cool. So given this conversation about diversity and trying to make a case for diversity, why might I start with this particular activity? What am I after in this activity? That we value similar things. What else is also true? We're also all unique. So we value similar things, but we also value different things. So I'd like for you to write this down somewhere on the piece of paper, a different definition of diversity. One that talks about diversity as a recognition and honoring of our commonalities and our differences. Commonalities and our differences. How many people have been to a diversity training before, or sensitivity, or whatever? Raise your hand, please. All right, you are the people I have to heal. Because all too often, we've gone to trainings, or we've gone to cultural competence or whatever, and we focused on our differences or our commonalities, but never often both at the same time. And so my thing is not necessarily revising history, but it's telling the whole truth about history. Columbus did some great things, and he also did some not so great things, which makes him human. So let's tell human stories, right? So it's about our commonalities and our differences. I am curious, though, because I've done this activity a number of times, and I asked some of these similar follow-up questions, one of which is, when you're going around the room, or when you look at those 5 things, is there anything that would denote specifically? I look at that one thing and say, oh, they're a part of this racial or ethnic group. Is there one thing in there out of those 5 that I could say that about you if I looked at your paper? Okay, so most people are shaking their head no. Some people have given me a blank stare. I do see you. I just want you to know, right? So my 4-year-old oftentimes tells me she's camouflaged. Dad, you can't see me because I'm camouflaged. I was like, oh yeah, who's saying that? Wait, right? No, I can see you. Is there anything that denotes specifically your gender identity or gender expression out of those 5 things? I could point to that and say, oh, I know what gender they are based on, or I know what their gender expression is based on this thing. No? Okay, so a couple of people said yes. I did hear a couple of yeses. Majority no's. All right. What about your social economic status? Is there one thing there that the IRS would say, aha? Right? So it is funny. People say, the only 2 things that are true are death and taxes. I would say, no, there are 2 other things. One is I wake up black every day, and the second is I put my feet on Indian ground. Those are the other 2 things that are also true, right? At least for me. So as we look at this, as we look at these things, so why is it that out of the 5 things that you got to choose, that your racial or ethnic identity didn't show up as one of those things clearly and distinctly? For many of us, our gender or our gender expression didn't show up as one of those things distinctly and clearly. And why did our social economic status not necessarily show up as a distinct or clear thing given those 5 things? Why do you think that is? Okay, so no matter what your race or gender or economic status, you have some of the same values. Why else? You're smart. You're brilliant. What did I ask you to do? That was a secondary thing, right? To find people who agree. But what was the first thing I asked you to do? Write down things that are important and valuable to you. I am not suggesting that race or gender identity or gender expression or socioeconomic status is not important to you. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that the things that you wrote down are more important to you than those other things, or oftentimes more salient in our lives than those other things, is what I'm suggesting. Right? And I would also suggest that race consciousness, that gender roles and gender identity and socioeconomic status is more important to other people than they oftentimes are to us. I was not born black. Don't be concerned. I know I see some of your faces. I'm not going through a reverse Michael Jackson thing. I'm good. Right? So in 1970, October 30th, I'm in the hands of the nurses. Now, the doctors used to do strange things in the 70s to babies, right? So I hear the story that they turned me upside down and they smacked me. And so as a result of the doctor smacking me, what do you think I did as a response to that? I smacked him back. That's an old Richard Pryor joke and probably the only one I can tell. So the doctor hands me off to the nurse. She checks my vitals and takes all my stuff. And anyone ever take that foot ID? Anyone ever use your foot ID? As a baby, they would take your... I've never used my foot ID. Nobody's ever said, "Can I see your foot ID?" Why do they do that, right? So she's taking my vitals and she gets to a part of her list that changes my life forever. And it's called race. And in Dayton, Ohio, in 1970, there were 3 categories to choose from: black, white, and other. So the nurse looks at me, she looks at my parents, she looks at her checklist, she looks at my parents, she looks at her checklist, she looks at me, she makes her decision. What decision do you think she makes? Black. But the mystery isn't in the fact that she selected something. The mystery is in, what was I before she selected something? I was born human, but America made me black. Did you know that there are no Hispanics in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Belize, in Brazil, Cuba, Puerto Rico? What are Cubans when they're in Cuba? They're Cubans. What are Puerto Ricans when they're in Puerto Rico? What are Dominicans when they are in the Dominica? They're Dominican. When they all come here, they become Hispanic. So a case for diversity. Maybe things aren't what we think they are. Maybe we need to critically think about how and why we fit into categories. Why it's important that we talk about the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education. It is profound for us. It is profound for us. And if that's not in the forefront of our mind as we do the work that we do, then we may be off purpose. We may have lost our way if we're not clear on how Brown versus the Board of Education affects us today. So I had an opportunity to do some speaking they refer to themselves as American Indian Reservation in Kansas. And so it was pretty close to Topeka. So it just made sense for my family and I to go to the Brown versus Board of Education site. And so does anyone know the case or the scientific positioning that was used to say that separate but equal was bad? Does anyone remember or know what that scientific piece was, or who those scientists were that said that proved that was bad? So the Clarks. So Dr. Kenneth and Mamie Clark came up with this experiment called the doll experiment. Many of us have seen, I think CNN has done things on it, kind of brown eyes, blue eyes stuff is kind of based off of that. And so my family and I are in Topeka, Kansas, and so we go to the historical site of this Brown versus Board of Education, one of the schools. And so we're there, and my daughter is, this is my joke, you cannot tell my joke, okay? This is my joke. So my wife is American Indian, and I am not, I'm black, and so we call her our Blendian. My daughters are Blendian, right? So black and Indian. So that's my joke, you can't tell my joke. Don't tell my joke. So my daughter's of mixed race heritage, and so we go into the thing. Now I'm an educator. This is what I do. Like I teach a class at Bethel University called educational equity, right? So how to close the achievement gap. Like this is, I live and breathe this stuff. I am the poster child for everything that education can do to advance a person. Right? So I believe this, and I have dolls of all sorts of colors and all sorts of stuff for my daughter, puzzles and books, and I'm infusing her with all of this good stuff. And so in this museum, they have this little kiosk, and she goes and she takes the doll test. The doll test simply is this. They have a black doll and a white doll, doll, and so the question is this a good doll? Which one is the good doll and which one is the bad doll? Which one is the smart doll? Which doll is the dumb doll? And with all of the stuff, this is my case for diversity. With all the stuff that I have infused into my mixed race daughter, guess what she does? She picks the white doll as good, and the black doll is bad. This is the case for diversity. I want a world where, not where she says that the white doll is bad, but she actually looks at it now. She's 4, so I'm putting a lot on a 4-year-old. I got a lot of opportunities to pull this plane up, right? But I want a world where she can say, first of all, why do I got to ask this? What's with these questions? What's with these questions? Are we dealing with content of character? But we're not quite there yet. So this is my case for diversity. So I want you to think about that. I also want to just point out, we also, so there are 3 frameworks that I operate from, and we won't get to dive into all of those. One is understanding human motivation. We're all looking for safety, significance, and belonging. All of us. We're all looking for safety, significance, and belonging, and that it's our context and our culture that causes us to believe that there's differences, right? Many times we are operating from obstacle illusions. Obstacle illusions. Artificial barriers to authentic human relationships. Obstacle illusions. But what I want to do is get people to move into cognitive control, because I have all of these urges, all of these fears, all of these primal things in my humanity, but I have to rise above them and take control of them, right? One of the toughest things as a parent was teaching my daughter how to use the potty, because she could use it anyway. She didn't have a problem using the potty. She just had a problem using it within context, right? But there's a body, oh no, on it, right? No, so taking cognitive control. And that's taking control of our implicit bias, our microaggressions, and the prejudices that we all have. And really moving out of this fault mentality into actually taking responsibility. And then lastly is the space that we operate in largely, is this legal framework. Looking at the 64 Civil Rights Act, looking at 88 Act, looking at Title IX, looking at FERPA, the responsibility we have for FERPA, and then recognizing the relationship between the social conditions, our legal obligations, and what it's just to do. So I'm going to skip that. So let me just hit this for a second. So many of us have seen this picture or some variation of this picture that talks about the difference between equality and equity. And what I find problematic in how we've oftentimes talked about the way we talk about equity and equality is that we never really address the core problem, which is addressing that the third set of pictures in this. Right at letter E, what solves this idea of equality and equity? Removing barriers, right? Removing barriers. So oftentimes, it's funny that the state of Oregon has trumped this conversation about voter registration. So in the state of Oregon, you have to opt out of being registered to vote. Barriers gone. You have to opt out to vote, right? So when we think about how do we engage our families, it actually might require us to start thinking differently about what we're really after. So what does that say that the state of Oregon is saying you have to opt out to vote? We actually want everybody to participate in our system of government. We don't want to create those barriers, right? So oftentimes when we talk about diversity and inclusion, what we don't talk about are the barriers that are oftentimes created. That's my daughter. She has nothing to do with this presentation, just like having her in my stuff. And when you do presentations, you can have whoever you want in your presentation too. But this is my second part of my case for diversity. It's the preamble to the Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Oh, that's the Declaration of Independence. I apologize. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare of blessings and security, ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Anybody else get a warm fuzzy when you hear those words? I love it. Anybody else love it? Okay, cool. Oh, good. I'm not by myself, right? Love those words. And as the ink is drying on the parchment paper that this stuff is being written on, what is simultaneously happening? What's simultaneously happening as we write it? These words are drying. The transatlantic slave trade is happening. Indian massacres are happening. So when I think about this, I think about being at Olin Mill Studios. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember Olin Mill Studios, but that was when you had to wait for pictures to be developed before you could see them, right? And so the family would all stand in uncomfortable positions and take this picture, and then Olin Mills tried to get fancy at the end, and they would have the family stand this way, and then they'd have the family like look off into the distance, and then they would superimpose both of those in one picture. And so you ended up with like this psychedelic family photo, like what is going on, right? So I can imagine that, and we would do that every year. And what do you think might happen if you went into the studio with your family, you took the picture, and when the picture came back, you weren't there? What would be your first thoughts about it? Who would you blame? The processor. How many people would blame the processor? Right? How many people would blame the camera crew or the technical aspects of that, right? Yeah, you blame that. But what would happen if that happened after 4 years? You just don't show up in the picture. Who do you start to blame? Who do you start to question? What if people said, you know what, I want to take your picture? What do you tell those people about your ability to take pictures? Don't take a picture of me. I don't take good pictures. No, don't do that. We start to internalize it. So when we look at these great words, who's missing from this picture? Women are missing from this picture. I do know in context that the word all men was a substitute for humans, but people took that literally and made it difficult for our sisters to participate in our democracy. Who else is missing from this picture? Who else is missing? Everybody except for white men. Now, this is one thing that we have to be clear about, right? So, because everybody wants to be heavy on the white man, and I want to relieve some of the pressure off the white man, because in that particular context, what white men were they talking about? They were talking about white rich landowners who could participate in that. Was that the majority of white people in the United States at that particular time? No, it was a small minority. I don't have time to talk about how white people were tricked into being white, but that's a whole other conversation. If you bring me back, that's a precursor, right? Okay. So this stuff is important to recognize who's missing. And so when we talk about this idea of social justice, it's important to know that it's actually getting people back into the picture. Really briefly, I want to talk about where we are right now, right? So this is the 2016 election. This is Minnesota by county. What I don't want you to do is to be tricked by what the newscasters are telling you this story is about. They want you to believe that this is about opposites, that it's Democrats versus Republicans, that it's good versus evil, that it is night versus day. That they want to create all this anxiety so that we keep fighting among ourselves. But I want you to look at this particular map critically And what do you recognize about this map and about a case for diversity? Where you see blue, what's the concentration of so-called diverse people like? Pretty important in those areas, right? And the other areas where we see red or pink, we recognize that the concentrations of diverse folks aren't there. So what we actually are seeing is a map about relationships and not a map about being conservative or Republican, right? So I wanted to just go through that theory, and I wanted to check. So here's the state of Missouri. Guess what? Those blue spaces are where universities are, where multinational corporations are. And some of those red spaces are where they are not. So again, I went to double check just to make sure. I needed 3 just to make sure. And what do we know about those 2 blue spots in the state of Kansas? Universities and multinational corporations. And what do we know about the diversity within rural Kansas? Not opportunities. So this map is about relationships, not about being opposite. Please raise your hand if you like your standard of living, where it is, and you like to conserve it. You don't want to lose any, you don't want to go backwards, but you just want to maintain that. Raise your hand if you want to maintain your standard of living right now. For all intents and purposes, it's pretty good. You are conservative. Please raise your hand if you like people telling you what to do. Nobody raised their hand. You're liberal. Don't fall into the trap that they're trying to set for us. So let's prove that. Let's prove that. So there are 2 other things we can talk about later: microequities and discretionary effort. But I think we'll see that in some of the work that we're going to do here. So I have 30 minutes. Is that right? I just want to double check. Yes, okay, good. So let's go back to your handout. So number 3. There's a large circle there. And let's call this the circle of all human knowledge. Okay, it's a little melodramatic, right? I am a dad's son. So what I'd like for you to do is to think about this as a pie. This is a pie of all human knowledge. I want you to cut yourself a piece of pie relative to the size of what you know of everything that there is to know. So of everything. All knowledge, science, all everything. All right? So what were some examples of things that you put in that piece of pie? What's something you know? School business, you know school business, yay! All right, something else that you know for sure. You're here, like you're clothed, right? All right, something about testing? Okay. So there are things that you know. What I want you to do now is I want you to cut a second piece of pie, and this is the piece of pie that represents what you are aware of that you do not know. You are aware of the fact that you don't know this. For example, I know that I don't know calculus. I know that I don't know it. I know that I don't know how to fly an airplane. I now know that that I should stop doing lobotomies. I learned that the hard way, right? So the size of what you know you don't know. So you have the piece of pie that you know, you have the size of what you know don't know. And some of you may say, well, that's the rest of the pie. I want you to quantify that because we're going to talk about the third piece. All right? So the first piece is what you know, the second piece is what you know you don't know. And what do you think the third piece of pie is? What you don't know, or your blind spot. All right? So I want you to write the title. I want you to write the word blind spot in that third piece of pie. So you have what you know you don't know, and your blind spot. If we look at all 3 of those pieces, we can call that a paradigm. So right next to that circle, paradigm. Paradigm. I used to say paradigm. I was hooked on phonics. It works for me. Paradigm. Paradigm. And what is a paradigm? It is simply what? The way you see the world. The way you see the world. So you have things that you know, things that you know you don't know, and you have those blind spots. Has anyone ever received a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy? Anyone ever received one of those? Right? Paradigms are the gifts that keep on giving. Whose responsibility was it to give you your first set of paradigms? You come into the world, and who gives you their paradigm? Your parents, your guardians, the people who raised you, right? They give you their paradigm. And where did they get their paradigm? From their parents. And where did they get their paradigm? When you get that copy that's been duplicated, we used to say Xerox, but it's a trademark word, you can't use it anymore. Yeah, but when that's been copied that many times, what does that copy look like? Is it just like the original? No, it's different. How? It's blurry, it's faded, and things have been added to it, right? So the paradigms that we've been given may be incomplete for what we need today. So how do we think about a paradigm? Well, first we must recognize microeconomics, discretionary effort, as well as implicit bias and cognitive control. So if you go to your handout, we're going to open it up. And what I'd like for us to do is to think about this idea of the illusion of knowledge. So we have an illusion of knowledge. We think we know things because of our paradigm that maybe we should challenge, right? So by that letter B, what I'd like you to do is I want you to draw a bicycle. I want you to draw a bicycle. Many of us have seen bicycles, we've ridden bicycles, so we know a lot about bicycles. So I want you to write down, just draw a bicycle. All right, stop. I gave you all not enough time, so I just want to make sure that you know that. What I'd like you to do is share your bicycle with people at your table. 4, 3, 2, 1, and so how many of us have well, no, I won't point you out. I don't want to embarrass you or anything like that, right? But many of us probably found some faults either with our bicycles or with others. Anybody find fault with your bicycle or your neighbor's bicycle after sharing? All right, cool. Well, we all know bicycles, right? So how is it that we come up with something that's incomplete? It's because of the paradigms we operate on, right? So if you can write this down someplace. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. What is the most valuable, non-renewable resource on the planet? You. Kingdoms and nation states, all these things have been designed to harness the power of you. So let's go down to letter C. And letter C is very simple. What I want you to do is, what you'll see is, I'm going to talk about that stuff. We'll skip down to the good stuff. Is a chart, and across the top are, it's not a complete list, but again, we're talking about principles of categories of people broken up in the United States. All right, so African Americans, European Americans, Latin Americans, or Latino Americans, Asian Americans, disabled Americans, and Native Americans. And then across, on the side are groups who try to give you information about those folks. All right? Try to give you information, either positive information or negative information. So I want you to tell me what those folks on the left taught you about those groups across the top, or conversations that they had. But I want you to do it in a very specific kind of way. If they taught you or said something positive about that group, I want you to put a plus in the corresponding square. If they said something negative, I want you to put a minus in the corresponding square. If it was never anything you talked about, I want you to put a 0 in the corresponding square. You can't have pluses and minuses in the same box, but the size of your plus and the size of your minus will dictate how much you learn. So a big plus is lots of positive, a little minus means a little bit of negative. All right? So pluses, minuses, and zeros. You have 90 seconds starting now. So from parents and family, what things do they say about Native Americans? Positive, negative, or 0? Four, three, two, one, and what I like for you to do is, if you see someone who is by themselves, at a table by themselves, to invite them to your table, and I want to give about 5 minutes to have some conversations about the pluses, minuses, and zeros. All right? So if you see somebody who's alone, invite them to your table, and we will engage in a conversation at our tables about our pluses, minuses, and zeros, starting now. 4, 3, 2, 1. So I want to say thank you so much for taking a risk to share some things with your colleagues. I want to say thank you so much for taking that risk. As you were thinking about how you filled out that chart, was there anything that came up for you as you were going through the practice of filling out that chart? Any emotions, any thoughts as you were doing that, putting pluses, minuses, or zeros? Yes?
When I was reflecting on personal experience of being honest, I had to put plus and minuses in every single box.
Yeah, so from personal experiences, he had to put pluses and minuses in every single box as he talked about his personal experiences. Other folks?
For me, I actually ended up deciding to zero on the right two-thirds because in my experience, those groups really talked about what I was going. They were just, I talked about, African Americans and, European Americans, but the rest of the group for me growing up were just kind of part of it.
So there were lots of places where you had zeros where there just weren't the people to have those experiences with, right? Yeah. Other folks? Yes?
I think if we all just fill this out of what we know, just in the pie that shows there's a lot more that we don't know.
You should be running this workshop, sir. You should be running this workshop, right? Yeah, no, this hopefully this is a tool that you can use that helps explain why your pie might look the way that it does, or how your pie looks the way that it does. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And what do we know about ourselves as human beings? We are frail and insignificant to the universe. Andre versus bear, who wins? Andre versus hurricane, who wins? Right? So we have to recognize our insignificance, but the importance we have to each other, the importance that we hold for each other. And so I would suggest that those pluses and minuses are not a positive or negative thing or reflection on where you come from, the people who raised you. They did the best they could with what they had, and it would have always been inadequate. My parents could have never taught me about sexting. Right? They could have never talked about that, but they gave me principles. They gave me principles. And so when we think about what diversity looks like in our school settings, what it looks like in our personal lives, it's not about fault or responsibility. I mean, it's not about fault. I don't care whose fault it was, right? When a baby's born, it doesn't matter how it doesn't think of, the baby itself doesn't think about how it came. What does the baby demand? Diapers and formula, right? Food. So there's a baby in our midst that we have to deal with, which is racism and xenophobia and heterosexism. We have to deal with that baby no matter how it came to us. It is our responsibility to do something, because what I don't want to do is pass on a bad paradigm that just keeps, right? So in our human family, there's some things we have to cut off. And so this idea of impact versus intent is something that we have to recognize. That fault focuses on trying to put blame, but never responsibility. How many people drive a car that has a blind spot? Is that your fault? I would say no. I would say it just is inherent in the design of all of those vehicles. Unless you drive a Hummer, that blind spot is your fault, right? Because the whole thing is a blind spot, right? Anybody ever picked up a piece of trash that you didn't put down? Anybody cleaned up a mess that you didn't make? Why do we do those things? Because it's the right thing to do, right? And so when we talk about this idea of impact, the law measures impact, regardless of intent. Regardless of intent. So why do we have state and federal mandated desegregation? Because people weren't doing it themselves. Did you know that the 1964 Civil Rights Act should have never existed? It should have never existed if people had paid attention to the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. If people would have done what the law said, we wouldn't have needed that. People say, well, affirmative action. We wouldn't have needed affirmative action if people would have obeyed the law. But they didn't. They didn't. Right now, we're in a quagmire in the state of Minnesota. The Cruz-Guzman lawsuit is going to set the tone for the country. And I don't know that people recognize the significance of this. It's going to set the tone for the country. Because what we've done, instead of saying we segregate, we've changed the word and said that it's choice. And in a free market economy, the choice can become. It's funny, I saw The Simpsons, love The Simpsons. It's been on way too long. I think they've experienced everything. But they did say this, which I thought was interesting. They went to what Bart called the rich people's malls. They went to the rich people's mall, and there was a sign that says, our prices discriminate because we can't. Our prices discriminate because we can't, right? And so what I would suggest is that this idea that we human resources, internal affairs, EEO compliance, and this is all about laws and all this kind of stuff. But when we look back at that map of the red and the blue, what we recognize is that intentions, how we relate to others, is extremely important, and it has direct result on the impact. How many people have received a macaroni sculpture or a finger painting or something like, or given one of those things, right? When the person gets that or receives that or gives it, the person receives that thing, where in the house does that go? On the refrigerator, the place of honor in the home, right? Some people say in the trash, you are cruel, you are so cruel, right? So no, it goes on the refrigerator so everyone can see it, everyone can admire it. Do you put it on Etsy? Does it become an Etsy project that you try to sell? Do you put it on eBay? No, why? Because the intention of the person who gave it to you is personal. So when we talk about this fault versus responsibility stuff, it's really about how do we make this a personal relationship. I've had tons of people who have said inappropriate things to me, but because we have a relationship, I can help them say the right things to me. Instead of saying they are in this category and they are unreachable, they are untouchable. But when we have those relationships. So if there was another aspect of this case for diversity, it's about building those relationships. If you go to your handout, you can, just two more things and I'll let you go. And thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor being here. It's been a pleasure being here, and I hope I've given you something to at least think about, a principle to operate from. If we look at letter F, what we recognize in letter F is that the top of the carrot and the root of the carrot are almost synonymous with one another, right? I mean, they're symbiotic in their relationship. And so the same is with culture. That the values of cultures are manifested in the physical artifacts of culture. So the values of culture are manifested in the physical artifacts of culture. Think about any ethnic restaurant that you go to. There are physical artifacts there that represent the values of that particular culture. And so what we must recognize is if we honor people's artifacts, then we actually honor their values. If we demean their artifacts, then we actually demean their value. What if I told you that one of the 5 circles that you wrote down was inadequate, that maybe it was dumb or it's not valued? Am I building a relationship with you, or am I creating a chasm between the two of us? Right? So culture is inextricably tied. That in letter G, bigotry is an emotional state. It is not a lapse or a gap in intellectual prowess. That's been part of our problem, right? So bigotry is an emotional state. So how do Help someone change their emotions. You give them a stronger emotion. And I would suggest that allophilia, or positive regard, or in layman's terms, you love a bigot. You tether them to you. That prejudice is a frozen mindset. Stop talking to teenagers long ago. I just asked questions. I did the same with prejudiced people. I asked them questions to make them think about their own thinking, to bring them back into the human family, to be Homo sapiens sapiens, the ones who know that they exist. And lastly, discrimination will be handled by the law. If I can't get people to think right or feel right about themselves, and they do, and they crash into somebody else, the law will handle that. But I think I could be more effective if I just encourage people and make them think. And then lastly is this idea of liberation. We've tried the separate but equal stuff. We've been trying to get people to be all on the same table at the same time, at the same stuff, when all along, what has been our challenge? In this particular graph, it's the table. So how we think about diversity, and the ways in which we are more alike than we are different, and the ways that we are different are things that we need to pay attention to. Once we start doing that, then we can go to the back part of our handout and know that there is dignity and honor in being human. There's dignity and honor in being human. What is dignity? Dignity is a pride that one has for yourself, and you can also give that pride to someone else. Dignity. What is honor? The highest level of respect. Yes, your honor. The highest level of respect. And being. Please raise your hand if you purchased a ticket or you passed a test that made you eligible to be here. None of us did anything to bring ourselves here. We all accepted an invitation. I don't like to think about that invitation and how that happened, but we all accepted an invitation. And now we're trying to figure out what it means to be human. When I worked with the young people, we did some service learning at the Episcopal home right on Fairview in University, which is now this massive thing. And we were in the volunteer training to learn how to work with these adults. And the trainer said something that was very interesting to me. She said, be kind to Miss Gertrude, because she's never been 97 before. I was like, yes, you're right. Miss Gertrude has never been 97 before. But I also gave that to my teenagers, and I said, you know what? Let me cut them some slack because they've never been 17 before. But then when I was able to give them some slack, what else was I was able to give myself some slack because I've never been in this situation before, so I'm trying to figure it out. So the thing about being human is interesting because human has two definitions. One is a noun and the other is an adjective. And as a noun, humans are what? Bipedal. We have two legs, opposable thumbs, a big brain, and a belly button. If you ever encounter a person without a belly button, be concerned. Human. But human is also an adjective. And what is that adjective? What do adjectives do? They describe the noun. So how, as human beings, do we want to be described? Or what do we tell the youngest of our human beings about what it means to be human? We talk about our compassion. We talk about our resilience. We talk about the things that we can do bad. But we also talk about the things that we can do good. We experience humanity. And I'll leave you on this one. I would question if someone is truly human if they have no relationships to other humans. I would question it. Because our humanity is expressed through relationship. Our humanity is expressed through relationship. So if I don't have a relationship, am I truly human? If there are places in my life where I have lots of zeros, am I experiencing all that there could be in being human if I'm not in relationships with folks? And that relationship is not just export thing, it's also an import thing. Because I gain so much from my brothers and sisters when I'm able to look at our commonalities and our differences. I have in-laws who we are diametrically opposed foes when it comes to kind of political stuff. But we are family. So we're going to work that out. We're going to talk about that stuff. So I encourage you to not only